Hey there, English learners and practitioners. Welcome to another episode of our podcast, Always Improving Your English. I'm Jennifer, and I'm here with my colleague Charlie. In today's podcast, you're going to get 7 powerful tips on how to improve your English faster. Look, these are tried and true tips that many of our listeners have found helpful, and I'm sure they'll be useful for you too. At the end, we'll list the most common mistakes people make when trying to improve their English.
That's right, Jennifer. I'm super excited to share these tips with our listeners. As we always say, learning English is a journey, not a destination. And with the right strategies, we can make this journey more efficient and fun. So, let's start with our first tip, which is crucial for anyone who really wants to dive into the language. Jennifer, would you like to do the honors?
Sure thing, Charlie. Our first tip is daily immersion in the language. Folks, when we talk about immersion, we're not necessarily talking about traveling to an English-speaking country, although that's great if you can do it. We're talking about creating an English language environment in your daily life, right where you are. This means incorporating English into as many of your daily activities as possible.
Exactly, and there are so many ways to do this. For example, you can start your day by reading the news in English instead of your native language. Websites like BBC News, CNN, or The Guardian are great options. During breakfast, how about listening to an English podcast? Want a tip? Listen to our podcasts here on the channel. We've got lots of options for you.
Great suggestions, Charlie. And it doesn't stop there. On your way to work or school, you can listen to audiobooks in English. Many literary classics are available for free online. When you get home at night, why not watch your favorite TV shows and movies in English with English subtitles? This helps improve your listening comprehension and expands your vocabulary.
And don't forget about social media. You can follow pages and influencers who post content in English about topics that interest you. That way, even the time you spend on social media can become a learning opportunity.
Excellent point, Charlie. The key here is consistency. Try to incorporate at least 30 minutes of English immersion every day, and you'll see surprising results in no time.
Now, let's move on to our second tip, which is equally important: practice speaking regularly. Many people become fluent in reading and listening comprehension but struggle when it comes to speaking. That's why it's crucial to create opportunities to practice speaking.
That's right, Charlie. And I know a lot of people get nervous just thinking about speaking English, but there are several ways to practice without pressure. One of them is finding a conversation partner. It could be a friend who's also learning English, or you can use apps to find native speakers interested in language exchange.
Great suggestion, Jennifer. Another option is to join online conversation groups where you can practice English with people from all over the world. And if you're shy, you can start by talking to yourself in English. It might sound weird, but it's super effective. Try narrating your daily activities in English or record yourself describing your day and listen back to identify areas for improvement.
Excellent ideas, Charlie. And for those who work from home or spend a lot of time alone, how about making video calls with friends or family in English? Even if it's just for 5 minutes a day, it can make a big difference in your fluency over time.
And remember, the goal isn't to speak perfectly, but to communicate. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. They're a natural part of the learning process.
Absolutely, Charlie. Now, let's move on to our third tip, expanding your vocabulary and context. Many people try to memorize lists of words, but that's not always effective. The secret is to learn new words in context.
Exactly. A great way to do this is through reading. When you're reading an article, a book, or even movie subtitles in English, pay attention to words you don't know. But instead of simply looking up the translation, try to understand the meaning from the context. Then, write down the word and the sentence it appeared in.
And don't stop there. After writing down the word and the sentence, try to create your own sentences using the new word. This helps cement the meaning and correct usage. Another tip is to use a monolingual English dictionary. That way, you're not only learning the new word but also practicing reading in English.
Great point, Jennifer. And for those who like technology, there are apps like Anki or Quizlet that let you create personalized flashcards. You can add the new words you've learned and review them regularly. These apps use a spaced repetition system, which is scientifically proven as one of the best ways to memorize.
Excellent suggestion, Charlie. Now, let's move on to our fourth tip, working on pronunciation. Often, intermediate students have a good grasp of grammar and vocabulary, but pronunciation can still be a challenge.
And the good news is that there are many online resources to improve pronunciation. It's a great way to hear the correct pronunciation in different accents.
One example is Google Translate. Besides translating, it has an audio function that lets you hear the pronunciation of words. You can even record your own voice and compare it to Google's pronunciation.
And we can't forget the importance of practicing specific English sounds. For example, the th in words like think or that, or the difference between ship and sheep.
And speaking of practice, a technique I love is shadowing. It involves listening to English audio, like our podcasts here on the channel, and trying to repeat what's being said simultaneously, mimicking not just the words, but also the intonation and rhythm. It's a great way to improve pronunciation and fluency.
Shadowing is really effective. Now, let's move on to our fifth tip, writing regularly in English. Writing is a fundamental skill that's often neglected, but it can make a big difference in your overall fluency.
Writing in English regularly not only improves your writing skills, but also helps consolidate grammar and vocabulary. A simple way to start is by keeping a journal in English. You can write about your day, your thoughts, or even summarize a movie or book you liked.
Great suggestion. Another option is to participate in online English discussion forums. There are forums on practically any subject you can imagine. Choose a topic that interests you. It could be about your hobbies, your profession, or even language learning, and start interacting with other people in English.
And for those who want more structured feedback on their writing, there are sites like Lang 8, where you can post your English texts and receive corrections from native speakers. In exchange, you can help others with your native language. Now, let's move on to our sixth tip, using authentic resources. By authentic resources, we mean materials that were created for native English speakers, not specifically for language learners.
Using authentic resources is crucial for advancing from intermediate to advanced level. This includes watching movies and TV shows without subtitles, reading books and magazines in English, listening to music and trying to understand the lyrics, and even playing video games in English.
And don't worry if you don't understand everything at first. The idea is to expose yourself to real English, as it's used in everyday life by native speakers. Over time, you'll become familiar with slang, idiomatic expressions, and different accents.
And speaking of accents, it's important to expose yourself to different varieties of English. Don't just stick to American or British English. Try listening to Australian, Canadian, Indian, and other variants as well. This will greatly increase your listening comprehension.
Great point, Charlie. And for those who like news, how about starting to follow English news channels? BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera English are great options. You can watch the news broadcasts or read articles on their websites.
And for literature lovers, Jennifer, how about starting to read some classics in English? Many are available for free online. You can start with short stories and progress to longer novels.
Excellent suggestion, Charlie. And now, let's move on to our seventh and final tip, setting specific and measurable goals. Often, people say they want to improve their English, but that's too vague. It's important to have clear and specific goals.
For example, instead of saying, I want to improve my vocabulary, you can set a goal like, I want to learn 10 new words per week. Or instead of, I want to improve my listening comprehension, you can establish, I want to watch one episode of an English TV series without subtitles per week.
It's important that these goals are realistic and measurable. There's no point in saying you'll study 5 hours a day if your routine doesn't allow for it. It's better to set smaller goals that you can consistently achieve.
Great point. And don't forget to celebrate your achievements. Each time you reach a goal, no matter how small, you're closer to fluency. This helps keep motivation high.
Absolutely, Charlie. And keep a record of your progress. It could be a learning diary where you note what you studied, what you learned, and what your next objectives are. This helps you see how far you've come and motivates you to continue.
Before we wrap up, Jennifer, how about we talk about some common mistakes people make when trying to improve their English? This could help our listeners avoid some common pitfalls.
Excellent idea, Charlie. It's always useful to learn from others' mistakes. Let's go. What do you think is the most common mistake?
The first mistake I see many people making is focusing too much on grammar and neglecting other important skills. Of course, grammar is fundamental, but many students become obsessed with mastering every grammatical rule before they feel comfortable speaking or writing.
That's so true. I've seen many students who can conjugate all verb tenses perfectly, but freeze up when having a simple conversation. The important thing to remember is that the main goal of language is communication. It's better to make some grammatical mistakes but be able to express yourself than to stay silent for fear of making errors.
Well observed. The second common mistake is people not practicing enough. Many students spend hours watching grammar videos or reading textbooks, but don't dedicate enough time to actually using the language.
I completely agree. Learning a language is like learning to play an instrument or practice a sport. You need constant practice. It's not enough to just know the theory. You need to apply it. That's why it's so important to create opportunities to use English in daily life, whether by talking with friends, writing in online forums, or even talking to yourself.
The third mistake I'd like to mention is lack of consistency. Many people study intensively for a few days or weeks, then stop for a long period, and then return to studying intensively again. This roller coaster pattern of learning isn't effective.
Oh, that's a very common mistake indeed, Charlie. It's much better to study a little every day than to have sporadic intensive sessions. The brain needs regular exposure to the language to really absorb and retain information. 15 minutes of daily study can be more effective than 5 hours of study once a week.
Exactly. And what do you think is the fourth most common mistake?
The fourth mistake I frequently see is people getting stuck in their comfort zone. They learn a little and think it's enough, that they don't need to evolve. Learning a language is like life. We always have to keep learning to evolve. Believe me, no matter how fluent a person is in the language, there's always something they can improve, especially when it comes to pronunciation.
We see many people with reasonable English, communicating with difficulty, but thinking it's good enough. It's okay that the person can communicate somehow, but isn't it so nice when we can converse in English with a native speaker and they compliment us? So, learners and practitioners here on the podcast, no getting complacent, agreed?
Excellent advice, Charlie. The key is to always challenge yourself and step out of your comfort zone. Well, folks, we hope these tips about common mistakes to avoid are useful for you. Remember, balance grammar study with real language practice. Practice consistently, maintain regularity in your studies, and always seek new challenges.
And don't be afraid of making mistakes. They're a natural part of the learning process. The important thing is to keep practicing and improving a little each day. And to our listeners, don't forget to tell us in the comments which of these tips you already use and which ones you're going to start implementing. Your feedback is very important to us.
Exactly, Charlie. And if you have other tips that worked for you, share them with us. We're always learning from each other.
Stay tuned until the end of the video to see suggestions for other podcasts that will help you improve your English level. Thanks for being here. See you in the next videos.